Andrew Greif, Oregon Ducks beat writer for the Oregonian, now joins us on Sunday Sports Extra. Really, I think this week will go down as maybe the most transformative one for the landscape of college athletics when we look back on it in 20 years. The Ed O'Bannon case, which we just mentioned, a huge ruling, as is the Big Five autonomy. And you got an interesting perspective on the Ed O'Bannon case specifically this week from Scott Frost, a guy who was not only in video games, but on the cover of a video game as a player the year after he won a national championship at Nebraska. What was the Oregon offensive coordinator's perspective on the ruling in the Ed O'Bannon case?
He said that he had no strong feelings in particular, but he did say that he thought that the players here were, allowed for, they probably deserved a little bit more than they're getting, but that he didn't want it to ruin football, and they didn't want kind of seismic changes to really come from this, because obviously he is invested in that college system. He's obviously well compensated for his role, and he's kind of a college legend himself. But even though he never prospered from that NCAA Game Breaker 99 cover, he thinks that the guys now are entitled to something. But he was talking in the courtyard of the Hatfield Dowling complex, which is pretty opulent. It's only a year old. And he said this is pretty much all they need, really.
I remember playing as Scott Frost in those old Nebraska teams, Tommy Frazier, Eric Crouch. So fun to play as them in the video games, and I imagine it's a similar situation, or would be if there were college football video games now, playing as Marcus Mariota, playing as like D'Anthony Thomas on the Ducks. Maybe if college football games come back, it'll be fun to play as Royce Freeman, true freshman on the Ducks, a guy who has gotten, I think, an inordinate amount of praise in the first week of fall camp, something that you usually don't hear from the Ducks when a guy's a week into his career.
Yeah, because as Mark Helfrich would say, it's just make-believe football at this point. They didn't put on pads until Friday when they started Monday. They didn't start really hitting until Saturday, some live hitting. So that's been the question we've asked all week. What can you tell? And the party line has been, well, not a whole lot. But when you bring up Royce Freeman's name, all of a sudden he becomes a guy who they just glow over. And I think that's important because Oregon has now apparently a three-headed running back system with Thomas Tyner, who prior to Royce's kind of praise all week, he was a guy getting all the praise for being more mature, learning how to practice, they said, and just kind of showing up early, working harder, being more focused, knowing the playbook, being better conditioned. And then Freeman took over. You add Byron Marshall into that. It's a really interesting trio for people that going into the season, you weren't quite sure how big a role Freeman might have against those two guys who, could be All-Americans themselves.
August 30th, we'll find out about Royce Freeman. We can't see him, obviously. We can just take the coaches and players' word for how he's doing in practice. And that goes for everything that we are looking at for Oregon in their fall camp. What do you want to find out most on August 30th when we can finally see these guys for the first time in a month? What are you most looking forward to seeing?
I think that the wide receivers is something that's not, an original storyline. Everyone's been wanting to see that since April, since Braylon Addison hurt his knee. But that's probably the biggest concern because you have 5 returning offensive linemen who are very good. Obviously, you have that stacked backfield we just talked about. You have Marcus Mariota. But who is he going to throw to? And can they get open? And can they block like Huff and Keenan Lowe did last year? That's a big thing. And also, kind of linebacker depth with 3 guys kicked off this summer. Where do they go for that inside spot especially? And then it's not necessarily the most glamorous kind of need, but special teams. They lost kick returner, punt returner, long snapper, holder. Those are things that, maybe aren't the kind of headline-grabbing things, but we've seen in years past, special teams have doomed Oregon when they thought they had really good teams just like this one.
Go for 2 every time, right, if you're worried about the snapper and the holder. Andrew Greif for the Oregonian, thanks for joining us on Sunday Sports Extra.
Thank you.